the godmother of the electronic voting machine problem. I mean, she was the one that really kind of, and then Harvey and I took her seriously. But a man named Nathan Gibbs, who you'll see in Uncounted, was the guy who woke me up and said that, you're an investigative reporter, why don't you investigate? Why would anyone make a machine that can't be audited without a paper trail?
Well, and he's one who died.
You have to ask?
He's the one who died, right?
Yes, he did. He died tragically while he was working on an accountable machine. So yeah, I would really urge getting to see the movie on Uncounted
tonight.
Reading Richard's book as well. And what I'm going to emphasize here is the 5 points I came up with, which I think 3 of the 5 have already been touched on.
You had to do all 5?
Stomped.
Well, you can, it's gone.
They took an old-fashioned stomping, sort of like a motorcycle game. So, but I'll still touch on it.
Summarize the first 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, before you go.
Well, number 1 is the question of the machine, right? I mean, this remains in my mind, and really I would put it under machine surveillance. Richard would like that because he likes to, you got to treat these things like a crime scene. If you, and I have a case as an attorney active before the state of Ohio, and we're talking with a very powerful individual, an insider, a whistleblower who we're trying to get to go on the record. And the point he makes, very similar to Nathan Gibbs, is our system is designed for fraud. If you design a system that's essentially designed to be hacked and programmed, right? I mean, there's a reason they call it computer programming, and there's a job category called computer programmers, because you get out of the machines what you want. By definition, if private for-profit corporations hiding behind proprietary software, which no one can see, inherently non-transparent, the ballot you cast is the ballot the programmer decides you will cast. It's just inherent upon the machine. And in most cases, it's the ballot you wanted to cast, but not in all cases, because you don't know, right? And if you wanted 51-49, you might only have to switch a few hundred votes, or in some cases, or if you wanted to flip, in the case of the RON, right, the reform measures in Ohio in 2005, right, when the election results come back almost exactly opposite of the last major poll in the state. Things that are passing by 30% lose by 30%. And I'm a political scientist by training. And one of the things, we were taught, it's a very famous acronym, it's called HISMR. This is what you run through, right? HISMR. You know, when you look at a poll, HISMR. When you look at a poll and it doesn't come out the way you want, you have to go through this whole procedure, right? This whole procedure, right? H is the starting thing. That is the assumption that there was some historical error between the time the last poll came. Right? And this is why the exit poll is such a problem for them. Because you're not asking how people will vote, but how they actually vote. And that's why the citizens' audits and the polls are so important, which I would go on the record to say they're getting around that problem, that is those that want a little slack in the voting, by only making the exit polls random now, but no longer representative. That way you create a larger margin of error. Instead of 0.2%,
30%?
or 1%, no, they're making them like... Okay, well, sometimes some stuff happens. There's historical, biblical intervention. Okay, some cases there's wrath of God, vote flipping. But really, what they do is they're making these exit polls, right, which have become the international gold standard for stopping election fraud. You know, they started out to see how people voted or predictive measures, but then they became the canary in the cage, right? They became sort of, the miners used to take the canary down there, right? Now what you got is this problem because of 2000 and 2004, right? The canary's dead. And it's a young canary, and they're trying to tell you it died of natural causes.
Yeah.
Well, dead canary. Had a heart attack. Okay, so you've got to make the exit polls sloppier. You make them more like tracking polls, right? So, and you do that by clustering, you know, throwing a lot of people in, don't making it statistically representative. Then you can say, well, you know, we might have oversampled blacks, we might have oversampled left-handed Albanians, we might have oversampled this group, except, you know, homo necrosophiliacs were left out disproportionately. I mean, they've always got some cover story. I can tell you today what the cover story is for 2008. The cover story is because Republican operatives are going on radio shows all over America and saying, you know, if Obama wins, I'm voting for McCain. And also they were going on and saying, if, you know, because of the way Hillary treated, if she gets it, I'm going to vote for McCain. So they're already establishing, they're going to say there was a huge crossover vote of Democrats because they were alienated by the way Hillary was treated back to McCain. So the cover story for the vote flipping and rigging and the looser exit polls is already in place. So in Ohio in 2004, go ahead.
You also got the extra special thing about how the Democrats deserve to lose Florida and Michigan.
Sure,
Right.
sure.
Yeah.
Which is another thing that's been, two key swing states that's been harped on over and over. You know, will there be a backlash? Will there be a backlash? So you're right. I mean, you've got two key states.
So now we're going to vote for
Just like right there, part of the cover story, well, Richard was able to find the forensic evidence for, but part of the cover story in 2004 was an unprecedented last-second turnout of homophobic white Southern Ohioans. The problem early on when the free press went around is we actually went around and to, you know, certain counties, Miami counties and some of the other counties, had people come and say, you guys must have just a hell of a time at, you know, 6 o'clock, 6:30 as the polls were closing. And they said, no, most people voted early. We didn't have any lines. It's sort of like, you go, okay, so why weren't the actual anecdotal evidence of the long lines there? The long lines were in the inner city, which doesn't also explain, as Richard would tell you, is why the rural counties came in after Cleveland and Columbus. There was a court order in Columbus keeping the polls open to midnight. But many of the rural counties in southeast, and the game is simple, right? This is, you know, as well back as Lyndon Johnson in Texas, right? You got to know how your opponent's base came in Cleveland and Columbus and the city of Cincinnati. So then you know how to assign. We need 14,000 more votes out of Warren County. We need 30,000 or so out of, you know, Claremont,
Butler.
so many out of Butler. Or is that you actually can divide it up. So the anecdotal evidence that came along with that, Cynthia Butler, a Free Press reporter, was in on a briefing, the head of the American Law School, a fan of Ken Blackwell, and he told the people gathered what a miraculous victory. As the election was going on, the chief election officer in the state, J. Kenneth Blackwell, was reported to have met with Rove and Bush, who flew in suddenly and unexpectedly that day, was writing down numbers on precincts in key counties. If Bush can just hit these numbers,
Right. God, he did.
miracle of, I guess, epic proportion. But this is an old game. So the key thing is the machine surveillance, because, and this involves a variety of things, right? There's in Ohio, thankfully, and hopefully in other states, there's got to be paper ballots at this point, because one of the games they were able to play last time, and the Dispatch, the Columbus Dispatch, which hasn't endorsed a Democrat for president since Woodrow Wilson in 1916. It's a German family, and they rewarded that Democrat for keeping us out of war. But in Franklin County alone, 77 machines went down not only did they conduct the election with about half the machines necessary, and then failed to put out 125, had them on trucks. 76 of them were on a truck circling the outer belt of the city in case of the emergency. While people are waiting in line for 7 hours, many of us argued that was the emergency.
Yeah.
Ah, in case there's an emergency, we're out here. Circling two
The emergency.
Yeah, the emergency. People are in court. There's court orders. So one of the things, if the machines go down, there's no paper ballot backups. And it's 77 machines go down. Is that you create these lines. So what you're really talking about is that despite record voter turnout in 2004, the actual vote count only went up by 1% or so, not even a full percent, 0.1%. It was virtually identical. Because what you're really talking about is not what voter turnout is, but what we call voter accommodation rate. That is the gauntlet set up to successfully cast an actual ballot. And again, we know from studies in political science, at the beginning of 15 minutes, people begin to walk away. So 3 to 7 hours, you can actually see and record some of them walking away, the elderly, the handicapped, people with children, people who will be fired from their jobs that don't have the type of jobs that can take time off, people that have other things they absolutely have to do. So that's part, and that's why the challengers came to Ohio in 2004. It wasn't that they knew they were going to get away with the challenge, but they knew they could slow down the lines. And that's the key. You slow down the lines, and hence people will walk away. So part of what we need to do, of course, and many of you already know this, is rage against the machines, right? Because, and again, in the article I wrote in the Free Press on kudzu, which I'll talk about in the next section, if you look at where the machines come from, the idea of the machines back to the 1980s, right? And the first time the centralized computer tabulators were beginning to be used was in the Iowa caucuses in 1980. And lo and behold, with Bush ahead, unexpectedly, by 7 points, the former CIA director who broke the code of honor by running for president. Usually the CIA was supposed to stay out of domestic politics, but he's running, and suddenly the computers freeze up, not unlike Claremont County. So in that case, Reagan ends up losing, and Bush wins unexpectedly.
You mean Dole?
No, in 1980 it was actually Bush and Reagan.
In Iowa?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And actually, Reagan, you'll see, actually then goes. Same thing did happen the first time they used the DRE machines, but the first time they used the computer tabulators, you had this unexpected freeze-up, which led later to an executive order by Ronald Reagan on whether or not these tabulators could throw an election, and it came out that in fact you could manipulate an election, which the CIA then used to go oversee, and were caught red-handed working with Marcos, trying to eliminate, it's on Henry Smith's very famous series, The Power Game, the president, a man named Richard Lugar, Republican senator from Indiana, blew the whistle. When it was this great event where Marcos is losing, so they shut down the mainframe computers and brought in new tapes. And luckily, many of the workers there actually walked out, and Lugar just happened to be there and witness it, and said, this is wrong, which made him unfit to be president of the United States. He wasn't a team player. So if you go back on these machines, you can see a long history and the development of the software. So here's one of the things we need to do, right? Number one, we need to know what machines are being used, right? You need to know the specs on these machines. This is the Squire problem from the 2006 election, which I wrote 2 articles on in great detail, and actually wrote a long piece for Loser Take All. And then Mark Crispin Miller called me up a few days and goes, well, I forgot to have anything written on Ohio. But the Squire piece, which I'm going to put out probably in the new collection of books, and is in 2 different parts on the Free Press, points out that when you look, what the magistrate found, there's a full hearing on this, what the magistrate found is that after the machines were certified, they brought in new hardware, printer, and new software. And this most likely led to machine recalibration. I hate the term recalibration. I prefer the more direct term. Vote flipping. Yeah, so you'll see this phrase in the paper. You know, as I remember reading about Montgomery County, 2006. It's like a dozen machines spontaneously recalibrated. Well, thank God they didn't flip the vote and record it wrong. I mean, so that's the corporate press's verbiage, because they don't want to report to the masses what has actually happened, which should be the role of the for-profit corporate press. Hi, your vote isn't being recorded right. We can't tell you that. Let's just use the nicer term, recalibration. Don't worry, it was just recalibrate. So we need to know.
Number 2 and 3.
Well, you get to number 2 and 3, but you also need to know the vendors, right? I mean, you need to know that guys working with, say, a well-known person in the White House tied to Karl Rove, and the Bushes say it's a family, the Rack family, Triad, is servicing 44 or so counties in southern Ohio, right? And they're showing up, as Richard got, they're showing up in Butler, and even though the machines don't need fixing, they do need fixing, right? Here's a freebie. We'll just mess with your tabulators, right? So, I mean, it's public record, or it should be public record, who's been in here, who they are. Is an honest Sam Hogsett? When he's not fixing machines or fixing machines for recount, he's busy writing letters saying, I'd like to shoot a liberal in the head. Then the damn liberal would know that I killed him, Sam Hogsett, not the gun, me. I mean, we need to know.
An actual letter, right?
Yeah, it's in the book. Yeah, blow his little pea brain to bits.
A letter to an editor where the man lives. This is a definition.
That's the sort of person
Well, the
who's
good thing
programming.
about honest Sam Hogsett, who was named as a John Doe in our suit, we haven't deposed him yet, is that honest Sam was called in Fairfield and a few other places when the recount just wouldn't match. But when Sam went online, it matched perfectly. So we need to know.
He works for who?
Well, he works for ES&S, but we need to know who. There's no background check. Who are these vendors? These private, for-profit contractors, subcontractors they're bringing in, right?
But
Who's
they're in place. What can we do about it then?
Well, what we can find out ahead of time. Who's worked on this
we
machine?
can?
Yeah. Who worked on it last election? Who worked on this machine? Do you do a background check? Because some of these people, you'll, or the notion, why aren't you doing it in-house? Why aren't you hiring actual computer programmers for your board? So we need to know who has access. That's the first thing. The second thing, of course, would be monitoring the purge list, right? Even USA Today has figured this out. And this is the beauty of the Everest study. The Everest study does a very good job of exposing the shortcomings of the DRE. But the most stunning thing to me in the Everest report, the Penn State professor comes out and says, well, these machines, are very vulnerable, can be hacked, but the poll books have no protection whatsoever, not even passwords, because when the people are getting on them, you need all the workers to be able to enter in the data and to access the data, and oh God, I accidentally glitched, 10,000 people gone. That's a shame. And day workers, because when it all piles up at the end, when all those applications come in, you're going to need some day workers in there working. So the entire database, and this is another question we have to raise in the movement. We have to raise this question very directly, is that in a computer era, why, short of a death certificate or a letter saying, I've moved, to Iraq, and even then if they're a soldier they should vote, but I'm no longer in the country, I'm no longer voting, why would you purge any voter from the roll, particularly as all these states now require IDs? It's like, why wouldn't you just move them in inactive stats? Why would you purge, but there's not enough memory on a computer? Why would you wipe out what is a fundamental right in the European Union and virtually every other democracy, where you turn a certain age, 18, you get a voting right, you get a universal identifier, right? We spend $50 billion, the third largest budget in the world, after the US military budget, the the Russian military budget, $50 billion spying on US citizens. NSA brags it has 1 million pieces of evidence, but you can't keep track of where in the hell the voters are in the United States, and instead of moving them to inactive status and leaving them on the computer where they got to show ID, you eliminate them totally. How does purging make any sense in a computer age? So we've got to monitor these purge lists, because one county in Ohio, it's a private list, as it was in 2004, right? Devolved with Walden, who pledged to deliver the vote to Reagan, one of his pioneers, and on the Ranger team. To Bush. So to Bush going on. So we got to monitor the purge list. We got to, as already been mentioned, we got a video to vote. Remember, I'll tell you the quick story from 2004. The footage you see in that movie is all footage which was part of the Video the Vote project that Free Press ran in Ohio, volunteer project. Is that the mainstream media, as the polls closed, 6:30, 7 o'clock, cold, rainy November day, some of you know the song. Some of you were there freezing, or near freezing. I went down to the State House where the media was. They were inside, they were warm, in the State House, in the press room, a lot of food in there, free food. And I went in and I said, you need to come with me. I'm an election protection attorney. I had a jacket on. So protection attorney. Come with me. One of the great ironies is that the only people who would come were Japanese public TV. There was only about German public television. The only newspaper that would come was Rupert Murdoch's London Times, and one radio stringer from Pacifica. So here were lines, here were people, in a cold rain, out the door. A woman being arrested and cuffed because she had her daughter stand in line while she went home to make dinner. And when she came back and got in line, they cuffed her for throat cut. Right? Here's people having fainted, heart attacks, women passing out on chemotherapy, and yet not one American, other than the stringer from Pacifica radio, would come and take pictures. Hence, none of that information. Right after the election, what came out, the cover story, was there was not a single act of irregularity, which, as I told Richard, absolutely true. Right? There were tens of thousands. So, I mean, you can't call Ken Blackwell a liar.
There's not a single shred.
Millions about 5 more minutes, because we're going to miss our next thing.
And finally, touchdown, you got to know your state laws, right? Is that Jeannie's touched on this, but one of my favorite state laws and directives is that Ken Blackwell issued a directive in 2004, is that to do a recount, you didn't have to recount to the certified vote. You simply had to run the ballots through the machines and see if they matched what the machine said. That is, Richard and I have both argued, is called a tabulator test, not a recount. Because what we pointed out when we went back down there is that the actual vote count was different from what was run through the precincts, run through the machine. And they said, so that's not what they told us to do. And they pulled out the directive and said, run these through, count them, see if they match the machine. But there needed to be an actual benchmark, like the actual certified vote count. Okay. And finally, we need to put a hotline, an election protection hotline on election day. We're hoping to work with Felder Revolution, Brad Block, people on the East Coast, people who understand the regularities. We need an alternative AP, right? An RSS line. Yeah. So it's coming up early in the day. The video is coming up, and that we can get this out instead of them destroying the information. Okay.
Yeah, on election night, and then before certification, you get everybody aware.
Right, of what's happening.
Yeah, sign me up for Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Regarding that hotline, you mentioned yesterday that PFA, People for the American Way, and Demos, and the other large organizations that also pretend or claim to work on this, do have hotlines, but you say they're not.
Well, the problem I found, I worked with PFA, I was trained by them. The problem is when John Kerry conceded, the PFA people, electric protection, actually threw the election complaints into a trash bin. Had the guys in charge, not saying friends of mine, who I had trained, I fished them out of the AFL-CIO. I sent people down and I had them get, most of the stuff in my large yellow book was actually trash early on. I mean, the complaints are coming in and they're recording them when there was going to be no challenge. And now remember, under Ohio state law, is that you can't challenge a federal election under Ohio law anymore.
But you can write, a book can be written about it.
Book, it can be exposed. Lawsuits, more important, lawsuits can be filed in real time on election day if we have a network that can show what's going on. Yeah.
And you know, that's why this guy was such a hero. The position he was in right during the election. He was working on this. And I came in 10 days later. You know, he had all this stuff done.
You know, we were really lucky because we had a freepress.org and we posted a little after 11 on election day. But really, it's up to us, it's up to the people, and that's why Richard's book, Witness to a Crime, is so important, because it's the definitive work that shows the election was stolen. Now we got to make sure they can't do it.
I believe 1,200 photographs.
Compare with your book.
My book was, I wrote my book in a hurry to get out in 2006. And mine takes on, it doesn't look at all the forensic, it has a small amount that was in at the time. My book looks at the whole thing, like prior to the election, the purges, the recount. Mine has the entire suite. Richard's is far more detailed documentation of the actual theft in Ohio. Mine's sort of a sweep of here's what they did prior to the election by purging people, you know, felons. Here's what they did on election day. Here's what they did on the recount. So it's a broader overview. But Richard's is the actual forensic evidence of the theft.
Thank you so much.
This was very, very, very interesting. And of course, the handout has some easy things to do.
Do these